evening. I don't know. Welcome. And yeah, very glad to see a lot of returning faces and some new faces, and for those that are new, just sit back, grab your highlighter, get your book, and let's get mucking. This is where you get to write and make notes and have a lot of fun with Bill and myself. Just very quickly, it's informal. We go for the next hour. We'll be reading the doctor's opinion, the last bit. So we're on Roman numerals page XXXI, page 31. I'll share a little bit and then Bill will jump in. And so we'll snorkel through for an hour. And at the end of the hour, there is a Q&A where we shut up and you get to talk. All right, so let's go. We are at the second last paragraph on Roman numerals page XXXI, the doctor's opinion. This is the second letter from Dr. Silkworth that precedes the rest of the book. We're going to start soon with Bill's story. And what he's done is in the latter part of this letter, he's written about two miracles. He wrote about Hank Parkhurst, who had been in and out of his hospital and left, had an experience, came back, and was a creature that he could not recognize. He had a slight feeling that he knew the man. He did know the man because he had his patient file, but there was a very vague recollection that he'd met this person because of the transformation that had taken place. And here's a second one that he talks about. When I need a mental uplift, I often think of another case brought in by a physician prominent in New York. The patient had made his own diagnosis and, deciding his situation hopeless, had hidden in a deserted barn determined to die. He was rescued by a searching party and in desperate condition brought to me. Following his physical rehabilitation, he had a talk with me in which he frankly stated he thought the treatment a waste of time, a waste of effort, unless I could assure him, which no one ever had, that in the future he would have the willpower to resist the impulse to drink. So there's just three little things I want to note in this paragraph. The first thing is that he says that the patient had made his own diagnosis. So where else in the book does it refer to this as a self-diagnosis illness? Let's go look. Page 31, the third paragraph. Right at the bottom, it says, we do not like to pronounce any individual as alcoholic, but you can quickly diagnose yourself. So I'm sure that a lot of us have family and friends and we look at them and we're like, yep, he's got it. He's one of us. You know, they say if he quacks like a duck, walks like a duck, flaps like a duck, it's sure got to be a duck. The thing is, we don't diagnose anybody because the power lies in the conceding to your innermost self that you are alcoholic, that you suffer from a hopeless state of mind and body. And then the person that they're speaking of, that he's writing about in this paragraph, is Fitz Mayo. And his story is in the back of the book, in those personal stories, the 52 personal stories, little mini meetings, Our Southern Friend, AA number 3. And then just the last thing that I want to note here before I hand over to Bill is it says here in that last line, it says, he thought the treatment a waste of effort unless I could assure him that he would have the willpower to resist the impulse to drink. There is another reference to willpower because I don't think it's a matter of willpower for us. You know, if I have to sit now in 5 minutes and ask any of you, what is the most dangerous thing you've survived because of your will to live? I'm sure you've all got a story. I'm sure you've all got a story. We have wills of steel, but when it comes to alcohol, it disappears in the vapor. But it's not just despair and hopelessness for us when it comes to our willpower. There's a beautiful reference to the correct use of the will. And I just want to take you there, if you will. Page 85, second paragraph. Yes, we don't have willpower to control or manage our lives, but there's a beautiful promise concerning our willpower. It says, the last line of the second paragraph, it says, we carry the vision of God's will into all of our activities. And then it says we can exercise our willpower along this line all we wish. It is the proper use of the will. So we do have a willpower and we do get to learn how to use it properly. If it's aligned with God and we're on the beam, that is the proper use of our God-given willpower. But we definitely ain't got no willpower when it comes up to taking that first drink and what happens thereafter, whether we have 1 or 10. We no choice, no power.
All right, mate. When you pause for that long, I think it's time for me to talk. And I'm an alcoholic named Bill. It's good to be here once again. When you said, I just read that again, I think the diagnosis that he made was not that he was alcoholic, but that he was hopeless. And then we sit around and say, you know, I can't diagnose it. Well, let me tell you what, sit in a crack house with me and I'll diagnose you. Sit in a bar room long enough and I'll be able to determine. And then it tells us in chapter 7, working with others, is if I'm convinced or I'm satisfied that he's a real alcoholic, then there's some certain things I'm supposed to do. Maybe when we say this is a self-diagnosed illness, that doesn't mean I don't have it if I don't say I have it. And it also doesn't mean I'm going to get recovered when I identify that I have it. There's a lot of stuff in between that point in this that's have to be done if I'm going to recover from it. But I suspect what we're referring to is I cannot go inside of you and see if there's a phenomenon of craving, an allergy that is activated by the first drink. Because as we've said before, you can stick a hard drinker and an alcoholic side by side in a bar. And from the human eye, they will look identical. They can drink for drink together side by side. Hard drinkers can do that. They're maybe the only creature on the family that can keep up with it. Keep up with us, at least till they close the bar room. And that's where the fun begins for us, because we're just looking for one more. And if we diagnose that we have the allergy, which is what the doctor's opinion ultimately deals with, although he suggests that we're going to need something of moral psychology in the form of a psychic change, and that's where he stops, that's where we come in. But that I've got to be able to be honest about that with myself. Do I get thirstier with each drink, or am I just drinking because I've had a bad day and that's my intention to get face drunk and go out and go home and sleep it off and get on with my life the next day? Because the real alcoholic, or the alcoholic of the hopeless variety, is unable to do that. So we pretty well know our own. And it talks about in the book, when it talks about when this point is reached, and since you're such a stickler for pages, Nadia, and I was telling someone this morning just how cross-referenced you are, it talks about when this type of thinking is established. That would be on page 24 at the bottom. Last full paragraph, Nadia, just in case we're taking notes for the SRA publication. When this sort of thinking is fully established, and they're talking about the self-centered, the blaming others, I've got excuses. When this sort of thinking is fully established in an individual with alcoholic tendencies, that's how we gauge what's going on, by the tendencies, not just the phenomenon of craving, but our perverse self-centeredness. Somebody done me wrong. It talks about, before we take the third step, it's putting the alcoholic mind on display. It's talking about being like a retired businessman complaining about everything that's going on up north while I'm lolling in the Florida sunshine. The politicians and reformers, the ministers and rabbis, the outlaw safecracker and the drunk who's lost everything. No matter what I'm protesting about, you can tell what's going on inside of me. All you have to do is engage me in a conversation, because I'll tell you what's wrong with Jesus and the rest of the world. Just give me time. And it tells us at this point, when these tendencies are established, that means they're properly fixed in place. We have placed ourselves beyond human aid, and unless locked up, may die or go crazy. I used to think when they talked about crossing that invisible line, when the cucumber becomes the pickle, that's the region they were talking about, but that's just a physical manifestation of the disease called alcoholism. They're talking about a spiritual realm. When I make the diagnoses that I am hopeless, there's no way out, and then you'll find me in a deserted barn or some trap house determined to die, hoping someone blows the back of my head off because I'm too cowardly to do it myself. That may be the diagnosis. And as you know, when an alcoholic says he may be wrong, he knows he's absolutely right. I may be right.
Spot on. Sorry, apologies for the video that switched off. It's a bandwidth issue on my side. Thanks, Bill. His alcoholic problem, we're at the bottom of that page now, we're on the last paragraph. His alcoholic problem was so complex and his depression so great that we felt his only hope would be through what we then called moral psychology. And we doubted if even that would have any effect. If you remember on page Roman numerals, page XXVIII, probably the most referenced page in my book, right at the bottom, the doctor talks about the alcoholic cannot differentiate the true from the false. Our alcoholic life seems to be the only normal one. So when you're trying to teach me a moral psychology, my morals and your morals are definitely not in line. I remember going to work, when I was working for big corporate brands, they would do these self-help and motivational speaking. And I remember they would right in the beginning ask us to write out a list of our value system. And immediately everything inside of me would just snap shut. My mind would snap shut because I'd be like, what the hell is a value system? I just do what I want when I want to do it. And I would probably take about 10 cigarette or toilet breaks throughout that thing because I just refused to play along. So I'm sure these doctors tried this and saw that that just wasn't going to work with an alcoholic because we are self-will run riot. However, he did become sold on the ideas contained in this book. He has not had a drink for a great many years. I see him now and then, and he is a fine specimen of manhood, as one would wish to meet. What a fabulous promise. What a fabulous promise. A fine specimen of manhood. Man, I wished I was one of those. And now in this program and the work that I've done, I can get that. I can own that. I can feel it in me. And I can accept the compliments when they do come to me. This program has made me join the human race. I earnestly advise, listen to this. I earnestly advise every alcoholic, now for any newcomer that's sitting here with us tonight, or anybody who's back in, and you've not waltzed through these pages, and you are tonight for the first time, we earnestly advise you to read this book through. And though perhaps you came to scoff, he may remain to pray. And that was me. I came to laugh and say that I wasn't an alcoholic. It was one of my secret thoughts I had for 3 years in this program, sitting at meetings, saying the right things at the right time, but every single time walking out there going, I'm not like those guys. I just like coming there because it was like group therapy. It was fabulous. I could sit and talk about myself all day long. And now, because of the psychic change that has happened because of this process, I remain to pray with every fiber in my being. Yours truly, William D. Silkworth. I see Bill's unmuted himself. Go ahead.
I did because I was going to put my foot in my mouth again. Sometimes I don't have anything to say, but I don't let that stop me. You brought up a good point. You brought up our Southern friend Fitzmayo, and he's referred to more than one time in this text, not only in the doctor's opinion, but he's talked about in We Agnostics. And I'll say something without naming anyone. We pay attention to the chat. And what happens is other symptoms break out. So I'm treating my drinking, and I think I'm treating my alcoholism. Next thing you know, I remember one day I told my sponsor, he said, that was a great lead you gave the other day at our local AA club. And I said, yeah, but Larry, I just went to the casino yesterday and gambled my entire paycheck away in 2 hours. He said, why do you take the gifts that you get here and go celebrate with the other guy's team? What I do is I think that I compartmentalize my alcoholism or my drug addiction as if the symptom is the ailment. And my experience is if I don't get to, like Bill Wilson talks about in his story, which I guess we're going to finally get to today, hallelujah, root and branch. What happens is I give God the branches. I take the lawnmower and cut the tops of the weeds off, but I wonder why the weeds keep growing back because I haven't gotten down to the causes and conditions. And what my sponsor pointed out is that I kept putting something in between me and me and me and the power and me and the first drink. See, as long as I don't take the first drink according to the singleness of purpose, or at least the misrepresentation of it in AA, I believe that my time, my coins, my years have something to do with recovery from alcoholism, and all they have to do is something that I've done for a long time. And when the myriad or the manifestation of this illness breaks out into other symptoms, there's not enough days in the month for me to go to all the fellowships to meet the requirement of their symptom. So what we do is surrender to the fact that the spiritual malady called alcoholism is a sense of separation from the power. That when I get in the presence of the power, all those things fall away. And if I don't, I'm blotting out my intolerable situation with food, with sex, with gambling, with porn, with work, with relationships, with it doesn't matter. I will find something to put in between me and me. And I'll sit around the rooms and wonder why people got lights coming on all over. And I'm still sitting in the dark because I can't tell them that the reason I'm borrowing money out of the AA basket, I'll pay it back later, is because I burnt my life to the ground at the casino yesterday, and I don't know what's wrong with me because it doesn't meet the narrative of Alcoholics Anonymous. So what we do is get together as a separated fellowship here. We study this book because it's the instructions on how to have a spiritual awakening if you meet the obsessive compulsive description of what we call alcoholism. And I suspect if it didn't have the word alcohol in it, and we said it was an obsessive compulsive disorder, I have an obsession I can't get rid of, and once I start, I can't stop, the symptom wouldn't matter. And lastly, I'll say this because I was on this thought before I got off on my tangent reading the chat. I have two books on my shelf. One is Varieties of Religious Experiences, and then the updated and modern version called Variety of Spiritual Experiences. And the reason that our Southern friend, as Nadia said, had such a spectacular and overwhelming presence of this power is because he was convinced that there wasn't one. And he was also at the point of self-destruction, suicide. Fortunately or unfortunately, Alcoholics Anonymous now, at least our fellowship, is a household name. It's on every meeting, every movie, every sitcom. And what's happening now is people are identifying the symptoms and coming here, like it says in our 12 and 12, 10 or 20 years before they have to go through that literal hell. Sometimes that's why a lot of them have the educational variety of the spiritual experience, which is described in our appendix on page 567. Because guess what? We grow into it slowly. My life wasn't so bad to begin with. My wife only threatened to leave me. She didn't take off with my relative. She's still there. And I come into AA and I get relief from my drinking. I get around some people who understand me and I feel pretty all right about myself. Maybe I'll take a 4-step. Maybe I'll take a step a year. Maybe the steps aren't for me. When you're desperate and you make that diagnosis of hopelessness, that I will end my life because I can't do it no more. The doctor says they make the supreme sacrifice. We read it a couple of weeks ago. They make the supreme sacrifice rather than continue to fight. I can't do it no more. My way's not working. I can't stay sober no matter what. And I can't take the hellacious consequences that whatever this thing's got a hold of me is putting on me. I'm going to end my life because I can't take it anymore. Those are the ones that we read throughout the stories in the book, especially in the first edition, that had powerful and spectacular spiritual revolutions because everything about them collapsed. And Harry Tebow, in his book on the study of alcoholics, the reason why we need to redo this, and Steve explained it to me, and he's so brilliant about it, that would be Steve W. here, who perpetuates all this and sets these up all over the world. We can duplicate the spiritual awakening on a daily basis. when I'm surrendered and that's all I have is a surrender and my life may get redirected, we come in here, and if I'm willing to inventory, self-examine, and meditate, I can have a spiritual awakening over and over and over again. And isn't that the nature of the alcoholic? I want that effect produced by alcohol over and over and over again. The problem is it doesn't last, so it's not permanent, and then it starts to kill me. There's nothing in Alcoholics Anonymous with this way of life that could ever possibly hurt me. It's the only remedy, the only prescription that leaves me in a better condition than I was before I got sick. Thank God for AA. Thanks for letting me talk.
Thank God for AA. And what we have is a daily reprieve. Absolutely. I also made reference to what Bill was talking about, that our behavior patterns vary. We come in, we put down the bottle, or the bottle gets taken from us, and then it's sex, and then it's eating, and then it's gambling, and then it's Netflix scrolling, and then it's overtasking. Okay, Bill, we made it. We're on Bill's story. All right, we are on Bill's story, page 1. So here's some little interesting facts that I found out while preparing. People could say, well, why is Bill's story in the beginning? Why is not Dr. Bob's nightmare the first one? So what I picked up was that Bill's story is one of a spiritual experience and a psychic change immediately. And you'll remember him sitting in the hospital bed thinking about how he's going to help others, right? Okay, that's psychic change. Dr. Bob's story is one of struggling with the mental obsession for a year and a half after he'd had his experience. So there's not much hope in that second story, but in Bill's story, that psychic change is explained, and that's where the hope lies. Not that Dr. Bob's story is not full of hope, not at all, but that was the reasoning behind this. And I made a couple of notes here. Bill's story, I wrote here, is that this is a story of the things I do to stay number one, numero uno in the game. Because when I was taken through the story for the first time, you'll have heard this as well. My sponsor said to me, let's look for the similarities. And I was like, there is nothing similar here between me and Bill. He's from America. I'm from South Africa. I'm a woman. He's a man. He's in the 1930s. This is like, there's nothing here for me. So she said, all right, let's just slow right down. And these are the questions that you're going to ask yourself while you're going through Bill's story. You're going to ask yourself, did you think the way he thought? Did you think the way he thought? Did you ever feel the way he felt? And did you drink the way he drank? So let's go. Let's go to the first couple of lines and let's see, for the women who are living in 2024, who don't have a stockbroker background, we've got nothing in common with Bill. Let's see. I bet you we do. Let's go look. War fever ran high in the New England town to which we new young officers from Plattsburgh were assigned, and we were flattered when the first citizens took us to their homes, making us feel heroic. Ooh, there's already 2 for me. We'll highlight them now. Let's see. Here was love, applause, war, moments sublime with intervals hilarious. I was part of life at last. That's a absolute clincher for me. When I heard that, I was like, yes, I know that feeling, because for my whole life, even from tiny age of 3, I never felt a part of my own family. I used to pretend that I was like Superman, and Superman's family would come fetch me one day. Anyway, that's like full flight from reality, right? Yes. Outright mental defective. Yes. I was part of life at last. That first swig of vodka was like the heavens opened. I turned around, and the people at the party were no longer talking about me. They were talking about me because they wanted to be like me. Well, that's what my mind was telling me. And in the midst of the excitement, I discovered liquor. Bill said it now. the effect produced by alcohol. He knew about liquor. He'd lived in a time where there was prohibition. There was a lot of focus on alcohol. It wasn't like it was something new to him. Never heard about it. But he discovered liquor. He discovered what it could do for him. I forgot the strong warnings and the prejudices of my people concerning drink. In time, we sailed for over there. Check here. Here's something that I also relate to. I was very lonely and again turned to alcohol. Normal people, if they're lonely, they pick up a phone, they call a friend, they arrange a coffee date. The solution to my loneliness, my being apart, my feeling like I don't belong anywhere, is to have a drink. That's my solution. It looks like it's
Things.
with Bill's too. So we definitely are cut from the same cloth.
Yeah, a couple things. When you study the history and Bill Wilson's description growing up, and you hear many of us, maybe all of us, talk about how different we felt from the rest of the world. We never asked them, we just knew we were different. You know what I mean? It was kind of innate. We talked about feeling like a square peg in a round hole. Someone said I wasn't comfortable in my own skin. And Bill Wilson had a sense of just really loathed himself. He felt awkward as a kid. He was clumsy. He was tall and skinny, so on and so forth. Self-centered people, self-conscious people, whatever term you want to use, are very aware of themselves, more so than most people. And what happened is he finally was a part of life. They were giving him applause. Your validation, your approval of me meant more to me than my own approval of myself, because I couldn't find it within. And Bill's family on certain sides, you'll have to look at, I don't want to misquote it with all these eyes on me, Rob, but Bill's family was riddled with alcoholism. And that's why he had strong prejudice from his people concerning drink. So maybe even his family knew, and maybe the verdict's in, that alcoholism, just like the color of our eyes and our hair and the look, and we look like, that this is genetic, that there's alcoholism riddled throughout, that it's not something that I get. The allergy seems to be innate in the genetic pool, just like the other things that we have going on inside of us, that you know when they do an amniocentesis what the birth of the baby's going to be before it even gets here, because of the genetic code. And if you look back in the family tree somewhere along the line, if we all shook our trees, there's probably a heavy dose of people who would give us strong warnings against drink and gambling and narcotics and everything else, that because we just don't do that well, the allergies within. So I guess what I'm saying is this: we're at a meeting and someone brought up the topic of addictive, I have an addictive personality. Well, no, you don't, because I'm not addicted to your personality. But what I mean by that is alcohol in and of itself is not addicting. If it were, everyone who drank it would become addicted. Alcoholism comes in people, not in liquor stores, bar rooms, or a bottle of whiskey. It's in us. It's our allergic reaction, which is an abnormal response. When I drink water when I'm thirsty, pretty soon I quit drinking water because I've satisfied the thirst. I have an insatiable appetite because I can't satisfy it. It produces a greater thirst than before. So they knew about it. If you study the history, the funny thing about it is he grew up or lived right, he was born right behind a bar room. I thought that was pretty interesting.
Thanks, Bill. We landed in England. I visited Winchester Cathedral, much moved. I wandered outside. I just want to pause there very quickly. So, a little spoiler alert, but a little later on in this chapter, we'll see how prejudiced Bill is against religion and Christian, the church movement, and that. I'm not going to get too much in that now. But what is interesting for me here is he didn't actually, well, from what I understand and what I've seen and read in silkwith.net and the history pages, he didn't really get in the front line, but he was involved with war and he did travel to the war-torn countries and he had seen and heard enough to break his heart and to be filled with fear. And if you know anything about yourself, and if you know the characteristics of an alcoholic, we are driven by fear. We are driven by self-pity and resentment. We are driven by 400 forms of weirdness. Now, you can imagine the kind of fear that Bill already has as an alcoholic, with an alcoholic mind, and to be in those, in that situation, war-torn countries, the fear that that man must have had. And what I love is that he goes to seek comfort in the church. He goes there to seek comfort. And you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of the times where in my life where I've been in a lot of trouble. Even as a kid, I remember the first time my mom's bicycle got stolen. I was like, dear God, I will do anything. Please, please bring back the bike, And much later on in life, that was one of my famous prayers. Please, God, make this stop, please. But the rest of the time, I never prayed to him. He was my 911 God, face up against a toilet bowl, dying for the third time that weekend. And I just can't believe that I'm drinking and using again. My 911 God. But here's so beautiful. He goes to this church, and it says here, much moved. Inside, internally, something moved inside of him, a spirit, a love, a connection, just knowing that he was safe there. He felt the presence of God, and he makes reference to this. That is why I'm highlighting this. He makes reference to this experience later on in the book again. And this is like a highlight this, put your gel sparkle pen here. My attention was caught by a dog roll, just a little bit of nerdy wordo stuff. Like, this is a silly limerick, actually, that they put on a gravestone, a little silly poem on an old tombstone. Here lies a Hampshire grenadier who caught his death drinking cold small beer. A good soldier is never forgot, whether he dieth by musket or by pot. Now, it's not the green stuff, guys. It's those days they used to drink little pots of cold beer. So this soldier, which is actually Thomas Thatcher, didn't die in the war. He died from alcoholism. He died an alcoholic death. And again, reference is made to this tombstone later on in the story. So stay with us. Ominous warning, which I failed to heed. Go for it.
Just want to say something. You know how when you see a good movie and something in the movie, someone pays attention to something somewhere early on in the movie, and then later on in the movie, you see the significance. So Bill Wilson has an experience of spirit in this cathedral, as Nadia said. He's going to talk about it 2 more times. And it was probably just me, maybe what everyone else got it, but when he refers to it the second time, or the third time in the book, but the second time after Evie approaches him, he says the real significance of the experience over here at Winchester burst upon him. And then he said he had needed God and wanted God, and God came to him. And he said that it had been blotted out by worldly clamors, mostly those within himself. If I'm not paying attention to the narrative, I think that he's talking about after he had the barn burning experience in the hospital. But what he's talking about is looking back over his life over that 20-year span or 18-year span. Every time prior to this point, when he needed God and wanted God and humbled himself, God came. And isn't it interesting that in how it works, they tell us where and when God is to be found in the now. May you find him now, not a 3-day right of refusal, not a waiting period, not 20 years ago. And I know I'm going to say something important here. Let me put it into the right words. So I was thinking about Tiger Woods. He must have found a golf club in the garbage as a 3-year-old kid on his way home from nursery school, and it fit like a glove. And if I were telling the story, he leaves the cathedral and his attention is drawn to a tombstone that was going to be the foreshadowing of what his life's mission was going to be. And included in that, he'd have the problem. So he goes to a tombstone and he realizes that this guy drank himself to death, How is it that his attention is drawn to that? And then all of a sudden, God puts inside of him this manifestation of what we know as Alcoholics Anonymous. I mean, the whole thing was like a tapestry. And sometimes you can't see God's fingerprints or hands when he's in it. But when we look back, like it says, we realize that the things which came to us when we placed ourselves in God's hands, that's in our book too, were better than anything we could have planned. God's the author of all of this, and sometimes he just tends to remain anonymous. That means nameless. Pass.
Thank you. That is beautiful. 22, and a veteran of foreign wars. We're at the bottom of page 1, the last chapter. I went home at last. Remember, we're looking for how we thought like Bill, felt like Bill, even drank like Bill. So here's the line. I fancied myself a leader. Even in AA, I've done this plenty times. For had not the men of my battery given me a special token of appreciation, my talent for leadership, I imagined, that's also really important, because the disease of the alcoholic centers in his mind, would place me at the head of vast enterprises, which I would manage with utmost assurance. I remember I was 3 months into my first ever job at the age of 19. You know, I'd been waitressing for many years prior to that, but my first proper monthly pay slip, pension fund, medical insurance, you know, all those deductions, grown-up stuff. And I was 3 weeks into the job, and I came home and I told my mom, they're going to make me a manager soon. I know I've got it. I've just got it. They love me there. I've understand. I know everything. Like they've been waiting for me their whole lives. I'm the best thing that's happened to them. I fancied myself a leader. I definitely get Bill. I get him. I took a night law course and obtained employment as investigator for a surety company. The drive for success was on. I'd proved to the world I was important. The drive for success was on. I'd proved to the world I was important. I spent my entire existence proving to the world that I was important. Like if there is one sentence that epitomizes and summarizes Nadia's life, it's that one. My work took me about Wall Street, and little by little, I became interested in the market. Many people lost money, but some became very rich. Why not I? You know, that was also my attitude my whole life. Like, why does it look like everybody's got the manual to life? Why does it look like everyone's always prettier than me, always funnier than me, always, you know, more intelligent than me, richer than me, good looking, taller, shorter, straighter hair? Why not I? Why not me? And that is our characteristic, right? Resentments. We are driven by resentment. So we've got the fear part tick. We've got the ego part, like he's a leader. He's fancied himself a leader. Here he's heroic applause and love, and this is it. We've got the effects of alcohol. He discovered liquor. He discovered it like it was gold in a cave, right? And here's the resentments popping up. Why not I? I studied economics and business as well as law. You know, if one glass of milk with whiskey, if one sandwich and a glass of milk could be good, maybe two will do the trick. Maybe not just 1 degree. Let's see what 3 degrees will do for me. Potential alcoholic that I was, I nearly failed my law course. At one of the finals, I was too drunk to think or write. Though my drinking was not yet continuous, it disturbed my wife. We don't see it as a problem, but others do way before we do. Way before we do. People start stopping and noticing that our drinking is just not the same as theirs. We had long talks when I would still her forebodings by telling her that men of genius conceive their best projects when drunk. that the most majestic constructions of philosophic thought were so derived. Oh man. Whenever I read this, I think of those poor souls that spend endless nights listening to me derive political plans, break down kingdoms, and come up with philosophies. I mean, there's an ancient textbook. It's a sacred textbook. If you're being quick to see where religious people are right, I'm sure you'll have come across it already. And I would dispel that book night in, night out, night in, night out. I'm definitely, I'm getting Bill. I'm getting him here. By the time I had completed the course, I knew that law was not for me. Restless, irritable, discontent, anybody? How many different courses has he done? Yeah. Laws? No, 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 law's not for me. Like, I can't think of how many times I'd started studying something, and halfway, maybe a third of the way in, I'm like, I'd be gung-ho, boy, like, I'm gonna do great, and I love it, and it's awesome. The lecture is amazing, and the content's awesome, everything. And then halfway into it, a couple of months into it, nah, this is not for me. Nah, it's not for me. It's boring. I don't know where I'm going to go with this. The lecture sucks. It's too far to drive. Restless, irritable, discontent. I mean, this is Bill is like alcoholic slapped all over him here, right? The inviting maelstrom of Wall Street had me in its grip. You know, just like here's another tick. I love chaos and I love drama. And Bill loves drama and chaos too. I mean, he's my flippin' twin. The inviting maelstrom. It's only us that'll find a maelstrom inviting, right? Business and financial leaders were my heroes. Oh, now listen to
Can
this.
I go
This is
back
so
to something
powerful.
real quick, Nadia?
Out of this alloy of drink,
No.
yes, please.
Just wanted to say, Angela brought up something here about part of the reason that Bill was trying to prove to the world because of what had taken place in his childhood. But even if Bill would have gotten the whole world to agree that he was important, our solution is never external. It would have never been enough. In fact, he was the founder, or at least the notorious founder or co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous. And although it made such a big impact, and he lived a lot longer than Dr. Bob did, 16 more years, to see the benefit of what he had something to do with, it still wasn't enough. And if you read the course of it, he was plagued by more than just what we're going to read in his story. He was plagued by fits of depression and low self-esteem and disturbance for the rest of his life. And when you brought up Fitzmayo before, and we didn't elaborate on it, in his story, it talks about everything that was going on around him: post-war disillusionment, serious alcoholism in his family, calamity, suicide, separation. Those were all things that the story says brought him to the point of collapse. But there's a spiritual principle, Nadia, that maybe some of us know better than others. Those were the things in the world. And he that is in me, the God that is in me, is greater than he that is in the world. All those things were external that our Southern friend listed were the things that brought him to the point where he hid out in the barn, deserted barn, determined to die. And I think about that so often. Something inside of him was more powerful and spectacular than that without. So it wouldn't have mattered if the whole world bowed down to Bill Wilson. The next day, he would have needed to duplicate that again, because my approval, my applause, I need an audience with one, Nadia. I don't know that. I think I need 8 billion people to know that I was here, because I'm dying of loneliness brought about by self-centeredness. And when the self-centeredness is removed by the hand of the Creator, I don't need anyone's approval but his. and I get to know it deep within rather than without. So it's real important. I mean, the narcissistic, it's talked about in the daily reflection. I thought I was the only narcissist in AA till I read the literature. And he talks about the alcoholic narcissistic personality. We fall neck deep in love with ourselves. And although we're the enemy, we're faithful to the bitter end. Wow, what a ridiculous disease we've been gifted with.
Gifted with indeed. Common sense becomes uncommon sense, right? Thank you. All right, we're at page 2, and we are in the middle of the page. We're on the second paragraph. In the middle of the paragraph, it says here, out of this alloy of drink and speculation, I commenced to forge the weapon that would one day turn in its flight like a boomerang and all but cut me to ribbons. So here's a little bit of interesting history. I hope that I'll be the first to the winning line with this one. Bill invented the first American boomerang, hence the boomerang metaphor there. That's pretty cool. Living modestly, my wife and I saved $1,000. It went into certain securities, then cheap and rather unpopular. I rightly, here it is, here's that thinking again. I rightly imagined that they would someday have a great rise. We're looking at the way that he thinks, right? Because it's the thinking that trips us up each time. I failed to persuade my broker friends to send me out looking over factories and managements, but my wife and I decided to go anyway. Here it goes. Here's another reference to the thinking. I had developed a theory that most people lost money in stocks through ignorance of markets. I discovered many more reasons later on. We gave up our positions and off we roared on a motorcycle, the sidecar stuffed with tent, blankets, a change of clothes, and 3 huge volumes of a financial reference service. That restless. So we've got discontent, we've got irritable, and definitely we've got that restless characteristic. Tick tack, tick down. You know, I'm 46 years old, and I moved a couple of months ago for the 49th time in my life. And with that, a few blameless children as well, you know, who've just had to just come along for the ride with mama. Our friends thought a lunacy commission should be appointed. Perhaps they were right. I had had some success at speculation, so we had a little money, but we once worked on a farm for a month to avoid drawing on our small capital. That was the last honest manual labor on my part for many a day. We covered the whole eastern United States in a year. At the end of it, my reports to Wall Street procured me a position there and the use of a large expense account. The exercise of an option brought in more money, leaving us with a profit of several $1,000s for that year. For the next few years, fortune
Nadia,
threw money.
Bill Wilson might have been the first self-proclaimed inside trader, because what he did is he went to places where they were kind of laid back a little bit. He was a fast talker, city slicker from New York. And when you read the history, what happened is the reason he stayed on a farm was twofold. Number one, because they were going to go broke if they didn't, and they worked there in the stable. But at night, he went under the fence to these factories, and he would go in dressed like a New York guy in his suit and tell them that he was with the big corporation that owned these factories. And he would get the people inside of the factories to tell them what was going on. They were discovering, I believe at the time, the photograph. Maybe like it would be like going to Kodak when Kodak was the camera people. And he got information and he would send it back to New York and said, we need to invest in this stock right here because it'll mushroom. when it hits the open market. He was right. So he looked like a genius. And what he was like every other alcoholic with some trickery shortcuts that later boomeranged and almost cut him to bits. And it's just real interesting to see the way we rely on dishonesty in ourselves rather than spiritual principles, because he was a brilliant guy. You could see that. You couldn't be an idiot and do all this, even if God was the one using you as a channel. He has to have something to work with, and this was the guy that he had it. But it was just interesting when you read the story and see how he went in and talked to him, and he would get some insider trading information. Hell, if they had the antitrust laws they do now, he'd be sitting in prison with that Boski guy.
Many an alcoholic leads a double life, right? That's such, I mean, we're in the third page and Bill is like got alcoholics slapped all over him. I mean, this is brilliant. I hope you've had some fun. Ticking. Yep, that's me. I've thought that way. I've done that. Yes, I got that. Bill's a man, right? Okay, thank you. We are on our, that was a lot of fun. Bill, that was amazing insights. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And now you get to ask us questions and have some fun with us.